In the quiet town of Milton, Massachusetts, the rhythm of life had slowed with time. Morning light spilled through the trees, casting soft patterns on the sidewalks. Birds chirped over gardens meticulously cared for by hands that had done more than plant flowers. They had shaped souls. Among them was Sister Margaret Callahan. At 84, Margaret's days were spent tending her garden, reading psalms beneath the oak tree, and offering whispered prayers for names she no longer saw but never forgot. Her face bore the quiet lines of a woman who had carried grief with grace and hope with steadiness. Her world had grown small, but her legacy, unknown even to her, was immense. Half a world away in the marble corridors of the Apostolic Palace, Pope Leo XIV stood alone in his private chapel. The scent of frankincense lingered in the air as he knelt beneath the crucifix. But today, his prayer wasn't for the church. It was for someone he feared he'd never see again. Before he became Leo, he had been Enzo Romano, a wide-eyed boy who arrived in Boston from Naples, Italy, clutching his mother's hand and a small rosary. The city was loud, the language foreign, the winters harsh. But in the classroom of St. Agnes Elementary, he had found something warmer than home, a woman who saw him, who believed in him, and who taught him that faith was not about rules, but relationship. Sister Margaret had changed everything. She hadn't done it with grand speeches or dramatic gestures. She did it in the way she taught the Beatitudes like love letters, the way she stayed after class to answer his relentless questions, the way she never flinched when he asked if God still loved his father, even after he walked away. Her answers were never hollow. They were soaked in lived faith. Years passed. Enzo moved on. Seminaries, priesthood, missions. Then, to his own astonishment, the papacy. But the name Margaret Callahan remained etched in his soul like a sacred verse, and yet, somewhere along the journey, she vanished. He had tried to find her over the years, quietly, discreetly, amid the whirlwind of Vatican protocol, but every letter went unanswered, every lead dried up. He was told she had left Boston, maybe to care for a sick relative, maybe to retire in silence. No one knew for certain. Now, as he stood in the chapel, memory played a cruel kindness. He saw her as she was on the day of his first communion, hands steady, voice soft, eyes full of belief in a boy who barely believed in himself. He whispered her name. Somewhere in that same moment, Sister Margaret looked up from her garden and smiled, as if touched by a thought she couldn't quite place. Before we continue this remarkable journey, a journey of faith, memory, and the kind of love that reshapes destinies, don't forget to subscribe. These are the stories that bring us back to what matters, the people who believed in us before we believed in ourselves. What happens when the most powerful man in the church seeks the one who first lit his candle of faith? This is only the beginning. Pope Leo XIV, despite the grandeur surrounding him, moved through his duties with a quiet heaviness. As he greeted diplomats, issued encyclicals, and blessed thousands from balconies, his heart remained anchored to an absence. Faith had always guided him, but now it pointed inward, to a question unanswered. What had become of Sister Margaret? Late at night, in the silence of his private study, he began his search in earnest. He instructed Vatican aides to comb through decades-old school records. He read faded letters addressed to Enzo in a graceful looping script. Every document carried the warmth of her hand, the scent of old parchment blending with his memories. A 1974 class photo stopped him cold. There she was, center frame, smiling gently with the children surrounding her like petals to a flower. He traced her image with his finger. That moment had survived time. Now he wanted the woman to match it. Rome gave no answers. The archives led only so far. Leo dispatched discreet envoys across the United States under the guise of pastoral visits. Boston first, then to Chicago, where some believed Sister Margaret had moved to join a teaching order. Every door opened led to another closed one, but he pressed on. In moments of stillness, he relived the sound of her voice echoing across chalk-dusted rooms, the way her presence quieted storms of doubt. He remembered the first time he told her he felt called to the priesthood. He was just 13, unsure and embarrassed. She hadn't laughed. She had nodded, placed a hand on his shoulder and said simply, "Then God already knows." Her words had stayed with him long after theology degrees and papal conclaves. He reached out to former classmates. Some recalled she had suffered a loss, perhaps a brother or a nephew, after which she withdrew. One remembered her saying she wanted to find God again in the silence. That clue sent Leo's aides to convents in remote corners, asking gentle questions, respecting the sacred privacy of the religious orders. Still, no one seemed to know where she had gone, or if she was even still alive. One evening, discouraged but not defeated, Leo sat by the garden wall outside the Vatican apartments. The sun dipped low, casting gold on stone and vine. He clutched his rosary and prayed, not for a miracle, but for clarity. Was he searching for her, or for himself? Just then, a young seminarian approached with a letter. It had been forwarded from a small parish in Massachusetts, the envelope aged and wrinkled. It wasn't from Sister Margaret, but from someone who had recently seen an older nun visiting their church, soft-spoken, wheelchair-bound, but with eyes that held stories deeper than oceans. She had signed the guest book with a trembling hand. M. Callahan, Milton, M.A. Leo's heart stirred. He rose, holding the letter close as if it were scripture. It wasn't proof, it wasn't certainty. But it was something rare, hope. He turned back to his chapel that night with a new prayer, not for answers, but for courage to follow the trail, no matter where it led. The search had crossed oceans, faith, and silence. Now, a name had surfaced, a place. He would go. But what would he find waiting at the end of this sacred journey? The rain fell softly in Milton, Massachusetts, tapping against leaves and rooftops like a rhythm older than time. Pope Leo XIV had arrived quietly, accompanied only by a small, trusted team. There was no fanfare, no procession, just a man, weary but determined, returning to the soil where his faith had first taken root. The address in the letter led them to a modest retirement home, nestled behind a grove of elms. It was run by a small order of nuns, women devoted to care, prayer, and silence. Leo stepped through the gate slowly, his hand resting over his heart. His gaze scanned the grounds, the garden paths, the windows, and then, by the far edge of the property, beneath an old oak tree, he saw her. An elderly woman sat in a wheelchair, a blanket over her knees, a worn book open in her lap. The years had changed her. Her hair, once auburn, was now snow-white, her hands fragile, her body smaller than he remembered. But the stillness in her posture, the focus in her eyes, and the peace that surrounded her like a second skin, it was her. He didn't call her name. He simply walked forward. As he drew closer, she looked up. Their eyes locked. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then a soft whisper left her lips, uncertain yet full of knowing. "Enzo?" His breath caught. "Yes," he said, his voice trembling, breaking. "It's me." What happened next was not planned, not expected. Pope Leo XIV, leader of over 1 billion souls, knelt beside the woman who had once taught him how to pray. She reached out a trembling hand. He took it. And then, wordlessly, she leaned forward and they embraced. There were no speeches, no titles, no papal ring was kissed, no ceremonial bows exchanged. It was simply a teacher and her student, reunited after decades. Tears flowed freely. Hers, his, and eventually from the sisters and staff who watched from a respectful distance. A Vatican photographer had followed at a distance, instructed only to document the visit quietly. But one image, the moment of the embrace, somehow made its way into the public eye. Within hours, it spread across the globe. Social media exploded. News outlets called it the embrace that shook the world. Commentators debated how it leaked, who authorized it. But to the Pope, none of that mattered. In private, he thanked the sisters for their kindness and asked only for time alone with her. They sat beneath the oak tree for hours. She asked about his journey, his doubts, his joys. He listened to her recount her quiet years, her retreat from teaching, her struggles with grief, her solitude. They spoke not as symbols, but as two souls finally catching up. When the sun began to lower and the rain eased, she turned to him and smiled. "I never thought I'd see you again," she whispered. "You've never left me," he replied. The world, meanwhile, kept spinning. Commentators praised the humility of the moment. Others speculated on its symbolism. But Leo, back in his room that night, wrote in his journal just 6 words: "I found her. I found myself." The journey had brought him to her, but the moment had revealed something deeper, a reminder that greatness is not born in palaces, but in classrooms, not in declarations, but in devotion. What would this reunion now awaken in others, watching from afar? By dawn the next morning, the image had traveled the globe. The photograph, Pope Leo XIV, kneeling beside an elderly nun, both locked in a tearful embrace, touched a nerve deeper than anyone anticipated. In a world often fractured by cynicism, division, and noise, the moment struck like a bell in a cathedral, clear, human, sacred. Major news outlets featured the story within hours. Headlines read, "Pope's emotional reunion with childhood mentor sparks global reflection." Social media became a tapestry of memories as people shared photos of their own teachers, mentors, grandparents, those who had shaped them in ways the world never noticed. In the Vatican, press officials scrambled to manage the flood of attention, but Leo remained calm. He had no interest in polishing or controlling the narrative. Instead, he issued a short, handwritten statement. "This is not a story about a pope. This is a story about someone who taught a child to pray, to think, and to hope. We all carry someone like her in our hearts. Find them, thank them." The simplicity of the message resonated. Churches, schools, and youth centers around the world began organizing events to honor mentors. Hashtags like "Thank Your Teacher" and "The Margaret Effect" trended across platforms. Letters poured into the Vatican, thousands of them. Some were addressed to the Pope, others to Sister Margaret herself. Most shared stories of nuns, janitors, coaches, librarians, ordinary people who had left extraordinary marks. Meanwhile, in Milton, Sister Margaret remained largely unaware of the frenzy. Her community protected her from the noise, shielding her from the interviews and requests. But she understood something was happening. She saw it in the gentle way the sisters smiled, in the glances exchanged as they passed her in the hallway. She chuckled to herself. "Imagine that," she whispered once, causing a stir without even leaving my chair. Still, one quiet interview was allowed. A small religious publication received permission to speak with her briefly. When asked how she felt about the Pope's visit, she responded simply, "I was his teacher. All I ever did was love the children God gave me. One of them just happened to become Pope. That doesn't make me special, it makes me blessed." Her humility only deepened the impact. Pope Leo, back in Rome, addressed the church during his next Sunday blessing. His voice, usually formal, carried the warmth of memory. "There are those who guide from the spotlight," he said, "and there are those who guide from silence. The second kind are the ones who shape eternity." He concluded by inviting every parish, every family, to share a name that had shaped their spiritual life, and to pray for that person aloud. The movement sparked something global. In Brazil, classrooms began naming their schools after forgotten teachers. In Poland, a group of priests launched a mentorship network for seminarians. In South Korea, students raised funds to support retired educators. From small villages to major capitals, the echo of that single embrace became a wave of gratitude and remembrance. But to Leo, the most powerful transformation remained personal. Each letter, each story reminded him that faith was not built on doctrine alone, but on people. On hands that held trembling children, on voices that calmed fears, on presence that spoke louder than sermons. And still, one truth kept pulsing beneath it all. There was one final chapter to this reunion, a chapter yet to unfold, where memory, love, and farewell would meet again. The final weeks passed quietly. Sister Margaret's health, though stable during the reunion, began to decline. The sisters in her community tended to her with tender devotion, their care woven with the reverence of those who knew they were witnessing something sacred. Wordlessly, they made room for her final visitor, who came not as Pope, but as Enzo. Leo returned as often as he could. Each time he brought books she loved, memories she had forgotten, and prayers they shared like old songs. Sometimes they sat in silence. Other times they laughed softly at the past, about the time he spilled holy water all over the altar, or how he once tried to explain the Trinity using a pizza slice, but mostly they held hands. She grew weaker. One morning, her breathing slowed to a whisper. Leo arrived just before dawn. She opened her eyes, smiled faintly, and whispered something he would carry for the rest of his life. Never forget the ones who lit your first candle. She passed moments later, her hand still in his. The world was informed with a short Vatican statement. Sister Margaret Callahan, retired educator and member of the Sisters of St. Agnes, passed peacefully this morning. She was a beloved teacher, mentor, and servant of God. But Leo did more. A private mass was held in the Vatican gardens, simple and sacred. Dignitaries attended, yes, but there were no speeches, no cameras, only scripture, hymns, and the presence of people whose lives had been touched by teachers, mentors, and caregivers. Leo's homily was quiet, almost whispered. She gave me faith not as a system, but as a sanctuary. She taught me not to be a pope, but to be a man who remembers where he came from. After the service, Leo returned to his study and opened the journal where he had recorded their conversations. On the final page, he wrote, "Some plant seeds they never see bloom. Some light candles knowing others will carry them forward." She did both. The church honors her not with monuments, but with memory. In the days that followed, people continued to share their own stories. A boy in Argentina wrote about a janitor who taught him how to read. A young woman in Nairobi shared how her grandmother had hidden a Bible under their bed during times of persecution. The hashtag Light Their Candle spread again, this time as a tribute to those who had passed. At the Vatican, a wall of letters dedicated to Sister Margaret was quietly displayed in a hallway where visiting students would pass. One note stood out, written in childlike handwriting. "Thank you for helping the Pope believe in God." Leo smiled when he saw it, but he wasn't finished. At his next public address, he offered a final invitation. "If this story moved your heart, I ask you, reach out to someone who shaped your path. Call them, write them, visit them, and if they are no longer here, speak their name aloud. Let the world know they mattered." Before ending, he raised his hand in blessing. And if you're looking for more stories that remind us what faith, love, and memory truly mean, subscribe. Stay with us. These are not just tales, they're echoes of what's best in all of us. A quiet hush followed. Then he gestured with a smile. And if you wish to continue on this journey, click on the video you see now. Another soul awaits. Another light is ready to be found.